New details following the deadly ICE-involved shooting in Minneapolis that killed 37-year-old Renee Nicole Good, a U.S. citizen who was shot and killed by a federal law enforcement agent. This morning, there are several questions about this shooting as federal officials and local officials take opposing positions about whether it was justified.
And joining us now to discuss what's going on, CNN legal analyst Elliot Williams. By the way, he's a former assistant director for legislative affairs over at ICE, knows the issue very well. He's a former federal prosecutor as well. Also joining us, Jason Armstrong, retired Ferguson, Missouri police chief. He faced a very similar situation in his town after the 2014 police killing of Michael Brown. To both of you, thanks very much for joining us. And Jason, let me start with you. There are multiple angles showing this shooting. You've seen the video presumably in slow motion, regular motion, several times. What's your take and what do you see in the video?
What I see in the video is it looks like that there's some vehicles that leave that area prior to the incident happening. They drive past the vehicle, the individual that was shot and killed by the agent. They drive past the vehicle while it's stopped in the roadway. So, you know, we're hearing reports that they were blocking the roadway, but I see vehicles leave beforehand. Then you see the one vehicle pull up and the two agents get out and approach the vehicle. The agent that actually did the shooting comes from the other side. And one of the primary questions, you know, that I would be interested in knowing in this is if the driver saw that individual in front of the car because she was engaged with the agents that were at her window. And when the vehicle pulls off, these situations unfold very fast and quickly. And you know, it was unfortunate that the agent was in front of the vehicle. One of the things that we really emphasize in law enforcement is the tactics of de-escalation. And one of the things that we try to do is not put officers, agents in front of vehicles, especially vehicles that are in motion, to try to avoid situations like this from happening.
There's a lot of serious questions raised by this video and the different videos we've seen of the angles, no doubt. There's still a lot of nuance here, though, and facts that we just don't know. But listen to what Kristi Noem, Homeland Security Secretary, said not long after the shooting.
This appears as an attempt to kill or to cause bodily harm to agents, an act of domestic terrorism. It's very clear that this individual was harassing and impeding law enforcement operations. Our officer followed his training, did exactly what he's been taught to do in that situation, and took actions to defend himself and defend his fellow law enforcement officers.
Not long after, the mayor came out and said that narrative from the federal officials like Kristi Noem was BS. But how can you make such quick judgments either way? Yes. So soon after this happened?
You absolutely cannot, Pam. Have we not learned anything in the last decade of trying to unpack whether police-involved shootings or even individual ones between people? There are a host of complicated questions over the reasonableness of the fear of the person shooting in an action that certainly can't be unpacked from looking at a video. I will say, setting aside sort of the nonsense that came from the Secretary of Homeland Security today or yesterday, the smartest comments, I think, came from Tom Homan, the border czar for the White House, who is known as somewhat of a hardliner on immigration and somebody I worked with for years at ICE. Tom was clear that we can't rush to judgment when looking at a video. Why? Because he's actually a law enforcement officer and did this for decades and years and knows that it is incredibly risky on either side to look at a video and try to unpack it as if we really know.
Let me just follow up on that and get your thoughts, because that the Secretary of Homeland Security immediately described this woman, Renee Nicole Good, a 37-year-old mother of three who was driving along, as a domestic terrorist. Right. That this was a domestic terrorist operation against ICE. What was your reaction to that?
That's very strong language, for lack of a better way to put it, Wolf. In order to refer to someone as a domestic terrorist, she's necessarily saying that the actions were taken deliberately to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, or to make a statement, to use a violent act as a means of making a political statement. That's a pretty broad claim about an individual that you really don't know what statement she's made, what writings she has made, has she attempted other acts before. It's a sweeping claim, and it's entirely plausible, I'm not saying it's true, but entirely plausible based on the video, that this individual may not have had a political motive in driving the vehicle. And so, yes, even if the facts might say that she acted with some violent intent, there's no way you can look at this individual right now, based on what's publicly available, and make a claim of domestic terrorism.
I think she had just dropped off her 6-year-old kid at school and was driving back home.
Look, terrorists.
Right, her ex-husband said that,
Yeah.
and then we've also found out through our reporting that she was there 3 minutes before as well. I mean, there's just a lot. There's a lot we don't know. But Mike, just to follow up on what Jason said, he made the point that ICE officer came up and tried to open that door, right? And there is a scenario in which she's looking at the ICE officer, not understanding that another ICE officer stepped in front of the vehicle. If an ICE officer puts themselves, or law enforcement agency puts themselves in a position like that, standing in front of a moving vehicle, but then also has reasonable fear for their life, how do you look at that from a legal standpoint?
You, with your legal education, Pam, have touched on the very nature of a factual dispute, and there is an open factual question as to all of these matters. Yes, an individual, a law enforcement officer, or any one of us might have put themselves in harm's way, but also been the, I guess, the recipient of a violent act. And I think it's for ultimately judges and juries to conclude at some point, did this person invite this trouble, or was the aggressor, or pardon me, who was the aggressor or perpetrator here? And I just think, from looking at a video as we sit here, we are not equipped to really make definitive conclusions about any of those things.
Yeah.
Now again, this all comes in the backdrop of tempers flaring in Minneapolis. It comes in the backdrop of a political climate around immigration that is very fraught, both for law enforcement officers and the public in Minneapolis. But the idea of simply looking at the video and making definitive conclusions about it at this point, I just think is nonsense.
How does Kristi Noem's comments, calling this domestic terrorism, how does that impact the trust that this will be a fair and impartial federal investigation?
Well, I think it's hard to see a fair and impartial federal investigation because many of the federal authorities, if not all of them who've spoken out, have made clear at this point that the officers' actions were permissible, or at least that's their view. It's hard to see how. So, for instance, in order for there to be a federal civil rights investigation into the matter, the Justice Department would need to make a choice to investigate this. I have a really hard time seeing how they would.
Let me get to Jason really quick as we watch this unfold. Jason, again, you were there in Ferguson during some violent protests there after the Michael Brown killing. And I'm wondering, as you see the tensions and sort of this tinderbox in Minneapolis, what your take is and how it can be de-escalated.
So first, I want to speak to the question that was just raised about the comments that are made by some of the federal leaders that are in their position. Some of the things that they said, already drawing conclusions about what happened is, that is a very dangerous position to take. And when we look at this, we can't just look at it from the legal realm of what the courts have said and what is legally justified or not justified. We also have to look at it morally. And that's the bigger problem and the challenge that I have with this. Taking the legal aspect aside from it, morally, this should not have happened. This incident was preventable, and that's what we have to talk about, and that's what needs to be a part of the conversation as we move forward, because we see too many of these incidents happen. Now, when we talk about what has happened now, and I know you all just had Chief O'Hara on, so now this has put his department on the front lines and in the spotlight of what they're having to deal with and navigate as they try to move forward and manage the tensions of what's going on in that community, and hopefully pull and rely on the relationships that they built and the trust that they built in that community since going through the tragedy of George Floyd being killed back in 2020, to hopefully allow people to peacefully protest and exercise their constitutional rights. And hopefully people will do that and not result to some of the violence and some of the chaos that we've seen from some of this activity in the past.
All right, Jason Armstrong, Elliot Williams, thank you both, and we'll be right back.